Now, Maker's Mark, we use 70% corn, 16% soft red winter wheat, and 14% malted barley. That is one of the highest small grain portions when I'm referring to the percentage of soft red winter wheat and malted barley, because most distillers will use a higher percentage of corn because it's the starch from the corn that gives you your alcohol. It's the small grains that give you the flavor. And that's really what the Samuels family was all about. When T.W. Samuels Sr. decided that he literally was going to burn the family formula and start with something different. He wanted something that tasted great, no longer had the burn or the bitterness or the roughness, blow your ears off, the old cowboy whiskey. He wanted to do away with all that. And so they started by trying to bake different breads, by using different cereals, to try and come up with something that worked so that their flavor, because in bourbon production, guys, when we distill and then put into the barrel, we're looking at somewhere around, some bourbons are 4 years old, some bourbons may be as old as 22, 23 years old. And we might talk a little bit about that, but if you think about it, if you start distilling today and you're not going to bottle it until 6.5 years later, and you start a formula, and it doesn't turn out very well in 6.5 years, you're in a heap of trouble. So they really started working with the breads and trying to figure out what grains work the best. Well, they chose the soft red winter wheat. Just like its name implies, it's very soft in nature and it's a very good tactile or mouthfeel sensation. Whereas rye tends to be quite bold, quite spicy. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with rye-based bourbons. I, in fact, cut my teeth on rye-based bourbons. But this is something that the Samuels family, they wanted to separate themselves from everybody else. And T.W. Samuels Sr. said, you know what, I've had enough. I'm going to do a lot of things different. And by starting that, they went with the soft red winter wheat. First ones to start actually using wheat on a regular basis in their bourbon. Additionally, when they decided to start distilling, they wanted to make sure that they had good, pure water source, whereas all bourbons did. That's why all your Kentucky bourbon whiskeys are all located in a very tight region within Kentucky. It's the limestone water. It's very important to us because as any base in any dish or soup or whatever, it's the same thing. It's that same flavor. You have to start with something good, clean, and pure. Because it's that initial step. If you miss that initial step, it's just going to domino effect on through your product. So from there, you decided, you know what? I know what cutting down a raw tree and then immediately making a barrel and charring that, I know what that does. And I don't like that because of the high resin in the wood, green wood. So we're going to age our wood. We're going to try and dry it out, or in other words, what most chefs refer to as seasoning the wood. That's not actually sprinkling it with something. It's actually letting Mother Nature wash and dry the resin out of the wood. Because what he was trying to achieve was by removing the resin content out of the wood, you get a much softer, more flavor from the wood and a lot more wood sugars. You don't get the resin because the resin content is going to give you the bitterness on the back of your palate. Because again, the primary focus is about flavor and nothing else. And T.W. Samuels did not care about anything else except for flavor. This started out literally as a hobby because he was, again, tired of that old rough frontier style whiskey. Now, bourbon also by definition must be aged in a brand new charred oak barrel. Now, keeping that in mind, he made sure that, okay, I'm going to age that wood before I make my barrel, and when I make that barrel, I'm only going to char it to a number 3 char. To put that in perspective, it's kind of like the belly of the alligator skin, and then your heaviest char, which is a number 4 char, not that I would exaggerate, but it kind of looks like the top side of an alligator skin, very pronounced cracks and crevices. So there was something that he was already doing a little different. He wasn't going to char as heavy. So therefore he's not burning off a lot of readily available wood sugars. So that now when we come back into how he's going to produce this, and if you remember, we started production in 1953. Now, the Samuels family, he was actually the fourth generation distiller. Come to find out, he was actually the sixth. But at the time, that's why you'll see on the Samuels the mark. You'll see the star for Star Hill Farms, which is their original farm when they started distilling. You see the S for the Samuels and the IV for the fourth generation. But at the time, when he first started distilling, he was like, you know what, I'm actually going to crush the grain. I'm not going to try and pulverize the grain. I'm also going to change the cooking technique a little bit so that we cook at a much lower temperature, or just allow it to boil to atmospheric, or just naturally boil. You don't try and pressure cook. You're not trying to extract everything out. So that when you're grinding up the grain, you just do a gentle crushing through the roller mill. We don't actually try and make flour out of everything. Because again, it's about the flavor. We want to extract some of those components out, and most of your flavor is going to start with that soft red winter wheat. Again, the corn is really only there, guys, to give you just the alcohol, but it's the small grains that gives you the flavor portion of that. Most importantly, he's bringing along the Samuels family yeast strain. Now, all the things that we do in the distillery and what Maker's Mark really concentrates on, the Samuels family yeast strain is probably what I personally consider to be my most important factor, even though we have people, and it's not about me, it's about the men and women in the distillery every day. The only time it's about me is if something were to ever go wrong, then the finger gets pointed back at me. But they brought their yeast strain so that he could maintain his flavor and continue his identity. Because that yeast strain has been alive for well over 100 years. Now, our little period of the dark ages that we like to call Prohibition, we don't like to talk about that and how everything survived. We don't want to know, don't need to know. The only thing I need to know is that it did actually survive Prohibition. So, if you think about this, also, we're coming out of World War II. This is a time when bourbon had a rebirth. And other distilleries were just literally changing the proof and putting a different label on there and rolling as much product out on the market as they could. Because people were buying it. It was that easy. You just couldn't make enough at that time. And here he is going back and literally starting from scratch. And what he started producing, he did not bottle his first batch until 1958. He waited that long, 5 3/4 years, before he did his very first bottle. And when they pulled it out of the barrel, because again, what we do is by rotating the barrels or putting the barrels up at the very top of the warehouse for the first 3 summers, and then rotating down, because at the top, that's where the barrel breathes. Jane, did you bring in that
I brought a stave, yeah.
If you guys will look at the stave, there's a real nice brown line. She's kind of following that along. That's the actual alcohol penetrating into the wood. When the barrel gets hot during the day, it will be roughly sometimes 10 to 15 degrees C hotter at the very top of the warehouse. This is where the barrel breathes. This is where the alcohol goes into the wood, and then at night it gets cool. It cools off, and we start our extraction. It's this breathing of the barrel that starts the reaction. This is where we're extracting everything out of the wood. Then after the 3 summers, we rotate down to the bottom floors of the warehouse, because we did our extraction up top where it's nice and hot. Down on the bottom is where it's fairly temperate. This is kind of something that we'll play. If we want to talk a little bit about Scotch later on, it stays more temperate. So therefore, everything slows down. This is where the reaction, this is where everything starts to come together.